Thank you so much, everyone. Welcome to Navigate Austin. Extremely excited today to host the AI panel. These things always go so well, and I think we're going to start out with a few of the hottest industry trends, start to break down and almost demystify some of the things that have been in the news the past few weeks. Then towards the last 15 minutes, we're going to open it up to you guys to start to input in. So here's a really good opportunity to get some of the industry experts' opinions, viewpoints, understanding on some of the hot trends in AI. We'll always try and break it down to the lowest level of understanding. So we'll probably take a few pauses as we go to make sure we can make sure it's understandable by everyone. But without further ado, Rafi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. First, hey everyone, and thank you, Josh, for this awesome opportunity. So my name is Rafi Qumsieh. I'm a data scientist at GM by day, and I'm the founder of Breakthrough Labs by night. So our mission is to use LLMs to accelerate the scientific discovery and the scientific process in general and the breakthrough rate. And we're very interested in topics like big problems like desalination, fusion, even AI, accelerating AI, right? So these are the problems we're trying to tackle using LLMs, and we're very early stage. If you're interested in any of this, please approach me, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or come talk to me. I'd be happy just to chat in general. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Blake Burch, the co-founder and CEO at Shipyard. We are a data operations platform that helps teams build data workflows end-to-end. So that could be ingestion, transformation, loading it into a place, deploying machine learning models, refreshing dashboards, and connecting all of that together in a super easy-to-use fashion. My kind of angle for AI is that a lot of the times we're trying to figure out how do we streamline that process, understand the data, and potentially automatically build out some of these workflows. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of opportunity in working directly with these models to actually build code and have something where conversationally I can have something that generates the code, and then with a single button I can deploy it and build those larger workflows. So excited to be here.
Hey, what is going on, everybody? How we doing? How we doing? Come on, how we doing? How we doing? Awesome, awesome. I'm George Munguia. I'm the co-founder at Coconut VA. And previously was the co-founder as well and CEO at a company called Thunderstrike AI. So my background is actually kind of more so large action models. So what we really tried to do was, instead of just taking LLMs, actually make it formative by using AI bots to go do the actions that an LLM would essentially be able to intake. So it was essentially like a ChatGPT for lead lists. We are now in the process of actually selling that company, which is awesome. Can I get a whoop whoop? Come on, can I get a whoop whoop? Which is great. And the way that we scaled that, though, was through Coconut VA. So before I came on as a co-founder, they've been around for a few years, we hired the virtual assistants to do a lot of the things that large action models are just not capable of doing yet, right? So in the meantime, this is kind of the interim solution for all of the manual processes that we have to do. So very excited to be here today, and thank you guys so much for having me.
Hi folks, my name is Aurora. I'm the founder of Metamorph AI. We're a consultancy that focuses on helping businesses use generative AI to solve operations and data problems in their organizations. So we build custom software projects that specifically focus on using generative AI in order to take tasks that are expensive and time-consuming and making them quick and a lot cheaper. Similarly, from a data perspective, we're very focused on taking qualitative data and using generative AI to turn it into much more usable quantitative data. I love geeking out about Gen AI use cases, so please come chat with me later.
I'm Peter Voss. I'm the CEO and chief scientist of Igo.ai. And our company really does two things. The one is, on the commercial side, we have a conversational AI that we deploy in call centers very effectively. The other part of our business is to continue to push the boundaries of AGI to basically get closer and closer to human-level, human-like AI. I'll actually be giving a talk about what's beyond LLMs that'll get us to AGI this afternoon in the Cowboy Pavilion at 4:45. So if you're interested in that. I also have a local meetup group called AGI Beyond LLMs that meets once a month. at the Capital Factory.
Thank you so much, Peter. So I think to start the ball rolling, let's talk a little bit about the generative AI explosion that happened last year and the impact it's having on our industry. So I think the first thing we're looking at here is actually this AI boom is driving an even larger boom of infrastructure need. And really good examples of this is rising NVIDIA stock prices, new chipset companies focusing exclusively on LLM performance. But I think what was really interesting actually was Sam Altman recently raising funds for his AI chipset company. And one of the most fascinating parts of that is actually his goal is to make AI agents that build AI chips. And I think that's a very interesting new paradigm that's coming across. I'm going to start at the other end and work back. But Peter, what do you think about this impact we're seeing on a sudden need for chips and infrastructure to drive some of this? And what are you seeing in your area?
Yes, well, if we're coming anywhere near $7 trillion of investment in chips, I mean, that's just a mind-boggling number. But if there's any kind of near that kind of investment, the chip prices will plummet. So that's a great thing. On the other hand, I guess the question is, once you start building chips that optimize for a particular architecture, you're going to be kind of locked into that architecture. So I think that's a problem. Perhaps if they can iterate quickly enough on architectures, maybe they can mitigate that problem. But I also see, from what I'm working on is that the amount of compute required for the next generation AI will be much, much lower because, our brains use 20 watts. And we've got to be able to get closer to that, and I think we will. So any chips built on hard-coded for transformer architecture, I think are going to become largely obsolete. So it depends how quickly they can kind of change architectures and change chips if we have all this massive capacity to create chips.
I think it's really interesting to think about how Sam might have gotten to that $7 trillion number. My understanding is that the global market for chips today is somewhere above the $600 billion number. So if he's expecting to need to make an investment of around $7 trillion over the next couple of years, that suggests at least 10x demand for chips. And as I'm thinking about it, analogies that come to mind are things like internet, electricity, roads going from something that is built locally in cities. So for example, you initially would have electrification in cities, in factories, and then there's been massive efforts over the last 150 years to push that out to more rural communities around the world. So if we think about the level of investment that was necessary to electrify the country, that was necessary to get smartphones to a huge portion of the population globally, to my mind, when I look at the use cases for generative AI, both for text, image, video, et cetera, essentially the commodification of intelligence and the commodification of the creation of highly customized images and videos, it doesn't surprise me at all that we're going to need to 10x investments in that. So it just seems like kind of a no-brainer. Like, it's a crazy big number and also a no-brainer when you think about the use cases. That's been, like, cost constraints has been a massive reason why, frankly, Gen AI hasn't already smashed its way through our economy. If you're a builder, if you've used these APIs, you know that GPT-4 is just too slow and just too expensive for a ton of use cases that you want to use it for. And that's because chips are a major constraint. So as the costs go down and the availability increases, GPT-4 and more powerful models will in fact smash through our economy in a way they haven't yet because they're just too darn slow. The service is too slow and it's too expensive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And we can talk about context windows, later and what the heck that looks like and what that means. But are you guys kind of familiar with like the gold rush analogy? Yeah, you can talk. It's cool. It's cool. Yeah. Yes? Great. So when there is a gold rush in any case whatsoever, you can either be the person that is trying to harvest the gold or sell the shovels or kind of get the breadcrumbs of everything. And in this case, I think NVIDIA is positioning itself to actually be the dominant player in this whole industry to sell the shovels to every single person that ends up wanting to harvest gold, right? They just surpassed Google and Amazon as the 4th highest value company in the world, NVIDIA did, right? That is absurd. And if you really think about it, the mass scale at which they are going to produce these chips, have we really heard much about Apple within kind of the AI play? No, they're always the slowest moving player to the category because they need to see how the market is adapting and then ensure when they launch that they will be the highest and most valuable player in the market. So as these, I definitely see, I mean, kind of moving forward, if you guys know what Rabbit AI is, it's like a little phone, a little new hardware that essentially you can tell it to do something and it can book a whole trip for you. And they call it that large action model. You can speak into it just like Siri. And it can book a whole trip and get you dinner reservations. I feel like this is probably going to be the future of where we're going to see Apple moving. And it's only going to be possible through essentially the development of NVIDIA's chips. NVIDIA, I could see definitely custom AI chips will likely go into most Apple products moving forward, and all these other hardwares that then allow them to even skyrocket further because nobody else can do what they're doing.
I definitely agree that there's going to be a large need for chips, but the thing that kind of concerns me is the same thing we've seen with just the general internet and using web pages. We used to have computers that were 100 times slower that were able to do many of the same things on the web, and now things continuously get slower and slower as we continuously make the technology better. My concern is that Sam has clearly found success with OpenAI, and the models get better the more compute you throw at it, the more the more advanced the technology is that's actually running and training the models and everything else like that. But I think there's going to be a large need to figure out how do we use what we have more effectively? How do we make sure that it's more environmentally friendly? How do we ensure that it can run on things on our smartphones where we maybe don't have to be connected to the internet in order to be able to run these models? I think that's a thought that's worth balancing, and part of this argument where we're like, hey, let's put $7 trillion into new chips. It's like, okay, well, maybe we need new chips, but $7 trillion worth? I think there's different things that we should be focusing on to just make sure that the models themselves are more cost effective.
Awesome point. Great points, everyone. Yeah, I don't know how OpenAI came up with this 7 trillion, right? I do think we definitely need chips. That's for sure. We need computation, unless we come up with biological chips or something, which is still possible. But the question is, and back to Peter's point, are we going to keep running on GPUs? We know they're power hungry, right? And back to your point, they're very power hungry. They want to, even inference costs a lot. We know that neuromorphic computing is not there yet, but it's so cheap to run, right? You just need to run the electricity. You don't need to load anything into memory. The memory kind of changes based on what passes through it. And then we have something really exciting, which is photonic inference or photonic chips, and these actually run on light, and that's extremely cheap, right? If we can do matrix multiplication with light, then we are really set. Now, there's a lot of challenges into these, but maybe that's where the research should go, because once we figure that out, we can start cutting the cost, right, the initial investment. So I do think that a lot of investment should be going into research, right? So we need to do all kinds of research, right? So that's kind of something that I think would be cool to go with instead of just jumping into GPUs, right?
Some really interesting points to summarize there, actually, which I think we're predominantly talking about AI chipsets addressing constraints. We're talking about how do we run larger models, how do we inference quicker, how do we start to bring some of these costs down. And I think actually some really commonality there is, at the moment, the power usage behind these things is in no way sustainable. Some of the solutions, actually, to play devil's advocate isn't just in the chipset. And one of the things that I've been seeing, like Rabbit AI is a good example of, is instead of horizontally scaling your data set and trying to boil the ocean with all these data sources, is actually building segmented models that vertically scale deeply into areas. I think actually GPT-4 is a good example of like a mixture of experts model that uses sparsity to start to break that down. I think it would be good for us to look at, zero-shot models, starting to look at these smaller models that solve niche problems, which does take us away a little bit from the idea of generative intelligence. But I think that in itself can be a solution to this. Does anyone want to comment there?
Yeah, I'll go on that one. Previously, I used to raise capital for startups, and there was a large kind of first-moving factor in vertical SaaS, right? And I think that there is also a huge first-mover advantage for kind of developing these one-shot models that are really specific to certain industries. And I think as those kind of scale and context windows also get larger and they're able to understand vast more amounts of data conceptually from previous, and if you can say integrate your CRM into it and any of these things, it's going to allow all of us and also these tiny little niches to just be absolutely dominated by some of these specified things that can really scale up in maybe not a huge TAM, but more so a really specified SOM, right?
I just want to add to this, actually. It's a great point. Even investors, if you read their blogs and what they're looking for, they do want SaaS companies that are vertical. Like they're telling you, if you're building a wrapper around GPT, don't talk to me. Build your technology and use these technologies to kind of enhance your product, right? And if you pick a customer, let's say you pick lawyers, make sure that you solve a lot of their problems with AI and without AI, and then we're willing to kind of invest in you, right? And it kind of makes sense, right? Because everything's getting nuanced and stuff.
I do think it's really important that not every company tries to solve the entire problems of the world, right? And we start to break that up and collaborate around it. And almost we're looking at it so strongly right now, which is we have this dream of almost an AGI, that you can use a single agent to solve all the problems. Peter, with your background, I'd love to know a little bit about what you think about large models versus small models.
Yes, it seems not very intelligent to me that at the moment all the money and all the focus is on brute forcing things, basically just scaling up. You know, it used to be attention is all we need. Now it's 7 trillion is all we need. You know, I think there must be much better ways of achieving intelligence. You know, as I say, getting closer to the 20 watts that we have, and you don't need a large language, you don't need an intelligent system to know everything about everything. It needs to be smart enough where to find the information, to validate it, and so on. More the way humans work. We don't, you know, we are good tool users. We don't need to know everything as long as we know where to reliably find information. So I think smarter models that can really think, that have metacognition, that know what they're talking about, to deal with, you know, to eliminate hallucinations and to have true intelligence that can learn in real time rather than being pre-trained. I think that's where the focus should go, and I see that as the next wave of AI. And I wish more people were working on that rather than just saying, hey, we've got a lot of data, we've got a lot of computing power, we've got a lot of money, so that's a hammer we've got, so everything looks like a nail.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of commonality we can look organically, right? Like even this panel itself is a mixture of experts, and having multiple viewpoints that will collaborate together and come to a single outcome is probably going to be more accurate than a single viewpoint. Let's jump into a little bit of generative AI content, because I think this year we've kind of seen a lot of the generative AI content start to be used for marketing. A lot of enterprises are starting to write things like newsletters using these concepts. And actually, we don't have a reliable mechanism for understanding if content has been written by an AI chatbot, or actually if it's written by a human. So I think a lot of people are spending their time right now being like, is this Reddit thread written by a real person, right? And obviously that poses some risks and challenges around how that happens. Aurora, with your background in operations and applying this so much at the forefront, I'd like to know your view on how we make sure we can get generative AI content to be a part of society.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting applications that are broadly beneficial in business. I think there's also going to be a ton of disruption to the job market. As you know, as I said before, as we're commoditizing intelligence, we've just, as a species, we've never had that experience before. Intelligence is the thing that's allowed us to become the dominant species in the world. But coming back to your specific question around like huge increase in AI-generated content, I think that'll have a lot of positives. I think that'll have a lot of negatives. I think there'll be kind of an arms race to try to be able to distinguish what content is written by an AI, what content is written by a human. I think it's kind of interesting right now because my understanding is that the Google algorithm doesn't necessarily downrank content that is AI generated. It focuses on what is the quality and the relevance of the content. So I think there is an opportunity to have a bunch of really useful and highly accurate information available to answer whatever niche question people have. And I don't know about you guys reading news articles on your areas of expertise, but it's pretty common to find that there are huge factual errors there. So humans are perfectly able to hallucinate also. I think there'll be a lot of potential efforts by regulators to require that AI-generated content, both text and video and image, is marked as that. I think some models will comply. I think there'll be ways around it. I think a lot of open source models won't. So as I said, I think it's going to be an arms race, and I think it's going to be really hard to consistently know that what you're seeing is human-generated, or that the agent that you're interacting with online is human.
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. People are talking about how you start to get receipts for your inference. You know, this content was generated from this model. This model used these sources of information to be able to represent that. I think the really big challenge we've got there is actually origin of training data. And every week we're seeing in the news a new source that people are saying, did you scrape that off the internet, or do you really pay the licensing fee for that? Which I think segments us really well into open source models. And at the moment, we're seeing the market share predominantly sit around OpenAI and ChatGPT. Google are pushing out with Gemini at some really competitive pricing, which looks promising. But actually, the thing we're seeing with the huge adoption right now is open source models. And actually, with open source models comes open source training sets and open source data behind that. Rafi, I'd love to know, what do you think the impact of open source models are going to be over the next year?
I mean, I think it's doing fantastic. Based on what you're saying, and I'm happy that some companies are releasing their models for some reason. Like, makes you wonder, why is Meta releasing their model, right? Is there alternative motive? And that's kind of what's tough about, you know, for-profit businesses in the industry. Their, you know, their motives are different than open source. It would be nice if there was some kind of, you know, kind of collaboration between them, and I know that there are, but we definitely need to increase this. There should be some investment from for-profit companies in open source. This way it encourages open source people to go out and produce, and maybe they become their clients, right? And we know this symbiotic relationship where industry kind of feeds open source, and open source feeds industry, so it's a great relationship to have. But I'm definitely a pro-open source person, and I think with what's going to happen, you know, with automation and stuff, the value of money will start decreasing, in my opinion, because there will be less jobs. So I don't know how this is going to be solved. We're going to have to see this one through, but these are my 2 cents.
Blake, do you want to pick up from that? I think it's such a really interesting point there about how currently it's industry, academia, and then also the open source community working on these models. Where do you see that going? How can those people work closer together?
Yeah, I think they have conflicting motives in a lot of ways, where the enterprises are going to want to have their own proprietary models, their own proprietary information, and oftentimes they might build off of the backs of people that are building open source. I think maybe there's potential for different licensing models to try and prevent that sort of thing, or to make it more collaborative with the enterprises along the way. But where I think open source can really excel is a lot of our standards in the development space start from open source. Like, frankly, I haven't used many of the open source models, but I want to be able to develop in a world where I can equally interchange what model I'm actively working with by just substituting a tiny little bit of information. That's just not the case right now. You have to redevelop and make sure that things work effectively there. I think also one of the more interesting use cases for the open source models is specifically doing it on local devices. So I know some people have figured out how to get like Meta's Llama models onto an app on your phone. So if you don't have internet access, you basically have a world of information at your fingertips that you can figure out without having to connect to the internet. And so I think as we kind of shift maybe more towards like data privacy or things living with the individual themselves, we might see kind of the world in the industry relying more on open source for those types of applications, whereas business and proprietary use cases are just going to be directly through the enterprise.
I think that's a really interesting point you picked up there around data privacy. And I think that currently there's almost a hesitation for people to put their data onto ChatGPT. And I think that we're seeing this quality versus quantity conversation right now with data. And the best data sources seem to belong to big enterprises and companies, and they're not in a massive rush to give that competitive advantage away. I guess, Peter, having worked with a lot of customers with the customer-facing industry, How do you think that that's going to evolve moving forward? Do you think we'll see some new paradigms of managing data privacy with AI?
Yes, what we're seeing in the enterprise market is realization. Every large company is playing with LLMs. I mean, they have to, kind of. But what we're finding now, kind of a year in of experimentation, is large enterprises are really realizing that they cannot trust LLMs, whatever they do. I mean, you've probably heard of the story where a Chevrolet dealer had a chatbot, and somebody asked it, "Will you sell me this car for $1?" And the chatbot said yes. And then he said, "Well, are you sure this is legally binding?" And the chatbot said yes. So and there are many stories like that around. You really cannot. You have to have a human in the loop. And I don't think that problem is really going to be solved. We really, need a different approach than, large language models to that. So I think there's a big problem. The other thing that we're talking about here is the matter of trust, of the quality of information that's out there. Call it fake news or just poor quality information that's generated. And I think there's a huge opportunity, business or potentially non-profit, to create trusted sources, and of course it's tricky because at the moment what people consider trusted sources tends to be partisan, but it needs to be something more like, I think, the original idea of Wikipedia. But if people can actually pay for it and say, these sources have been validated, their quality assurance, and we can rely on it, because the problem of bad information getting out there, being created with LLMs, is not going away. It's going to get much, much worse. And I think people will say, I really need to have sources that I can trust.
Can I add something there? I absolutely agree that LLMs, when not well deployed or prompt engineered, cannot be trusted to be customer-facing, for example. I think that's also true, frankly, for employees off the street who have not received any training or expectation setting around what kind of offers they can make to customers. So if you're deploying a raw LLM, you do a little bit of light prompt engineering, and you don't do any red team testing, yeah, you're probably going to have some problems. Similarly to if you hire someone off the street, put them in your call center, give them like a 30-minute intro on how your company works, and then put them on the job, you're going to get bad outcomes. So I think it is actually pretty useful to think about LLMs as, to a first approximation, a smart, eager, very knowledgeable intern with like a flexible relationship with the truth, where there's a lot of kind of scaffolding and training and expectation setting that needs to be used in order to make sure it doesn't go off the rails.
Flexible interpretation of the truth. Okay.
I quite like the idea of looking at LLM as being an intern in a department. But I think thank you all for your contributions. And let's turn it around to the audience to see if anyone's got any questions to get answered by our experts. And there's a variety of hands raised up.
I saw this guy. I saw this one back here.
We'll have time for a few.
Thanks. Hey, thank you for the panel. Excuse the parallel if it's distasteful or untenable to you guys, but when you were talking about the power consumption and the processing power required for as we scale this AI future, I couldn't help but think of like crypto and how the regulations sort of swooped into crypto and stuff. And so I was wondering if you guys are already seeing that, or how you can maybe prepare for kind of the regulatory response once people figure out, hey, AI is going to have all this like new stuff.
I expect there's going to be massive attempts to regulate AI over the next couple years. I think we're just beginning to see lawmakers in the United States recognize that they don't want the same outcome with AI that we got with social media. I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but I think it extends beyond that, where it not only has the potential to massively potentially damage mental health, but also disrupt economies. So I think there's going to be huge demand, huge incentives for governments to regulate AI. I personally don't have any idea what that looks like, but yeah, I'm expecting it.
Yeah, and I'll add in there is, I don't know if you guys saw this the other day, but the FCC released, the Federal Communication Commission, that it is now illegal to do AI, robot, human-like cold calling. So more than 100 startups definitely died, like about 2 weeks ago. So Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a thing where you have to make a very competitive moat, but you really don't know. I mean, what these, governmental regulations are going to be, because then your startup could literally die within 24 hours, and then you have to pivot into a whole different industry and product.
And just one more thing. I think regulation, in my opinion, is necessary, but it has to be, it has to make sense, and it has to be tested maybe on a small population first. So maybe regulating, because it's, consuming so much energy, what is the trade-off, or what is the other side of it? Maybe, we're having less jobs, people are driving less, for example, or something like that, right? So we have to look at the trade-offs when we make regulations. Some regulations to me, are insane. It's like you can't buy beer on Sunday at 10 a.m. or something. I don't understand things like that, but things of that sort, they have to be kind of weighed and tested, right? Scientifically approached, not just because a politician has a gut feeling or something, right?
Alex Seguin, AI sensor fusion enthusiast as well as consciousness enthusiast, I'll say. So I've thought about using AI in human AI interactions, and it seems like humanity could use something that can aggregate a billion people's responses and summarize that 3 things for like literally self-paced management and self-governance. Why don't you think that's been addressed, as well as how do we leverage tech plus human to better make decisions for broad consensus making, right?
I would love to actually touch on that one. There is actually a startup that is doing this in Austin. Their website is boop.vip, but essentially it's like they are gathering data from human interactions, logging that so that you have contextual, essentially background on every single person that you meet, and it can, hopefully in the future we're going to be having a lot more context around all of that to then be able to follow up, be able to communicate more clear, and then also be able to work more collaboratively together. But I think this is just kind of the start of hopefully a new wave where we can work far, far better together.
I think the technology already exists to do that. So we have huge surveys from various populations around their sentiment when it comes to social issues, political issues, personal issues, et cetera. We have the ability to use LLMs to kind of create synthetic personas in terms of loading up that belief system, perhaps doing cluster analysis in order to figure out like what are the maybe 5 main like clusters of belief, because there tends to be a lot of correlation between certain social, political beliefs, identities, et cetera. So we really do actually have that technology today. If anyone's interested in running a project like that, my team would be more than happy to help, because that's a really cool idea.
I was wanting to know if you've heard any conversations about the use of quantum computing in the creation of LLMs, and how that might compete with what Nativia is trying to do with $7 trillion worth of chips.
I think that's a great point. Quantum computing has its own issues, right? It does do optimization really well, right? It can find a good solution, which is like maybe find the best parameters that have the lowest error cost function or whatever. But I think I think we need to be doing all of this at the same time, because we just need to accelerate breakthroughs right now, right? We could be just one breakthrough away from this, right? But with quantum computing, I think the biggest issue right now is scaling the number of qubits, right? And I think past, like, I don't know the number, 500 or 1,000, I forgot the number, but yeah, if we can scale it and start using this, that would be fantastic. So, and 7 trillion feel like you can do so much with 7 trillion, right? And I feel like just one more thing, like if as humanity we actually align on these things, we can do magic, right? Our problem is that we're all scattered all around. So, but yeah, great point to bring up quantum computing.
There's some good parallelisms there to some of the earlier questions that actually, practicality. Can a company run a quantum computer running at minus whatever temperature inside a building? Will you see cloud providers start to move and being scientific discovery companies? And I think Google or IBM, one of the two, have a really interesting quantum computing project right now. And they're still both feet in belief that this would be the way to do things, even with the thought that they currently have, I think it's 2 rows of training data loaded into a quantum computer. which you compare to modern day paradigms, useless. But they see that light in the very long tunnel. And the truth being told is current computing paradigms where we iterate over loops to be able to find the outcome of the answer, that will entirely be made redundant by the concept that we have a quantum computer that runs every single possible combination in parallel and ranks them for probability of outcome. I think once we get to that world, LLMs won't be the primary security. You'll be keeping your bank account safe, all those types of things alongside it. So I think that wave of disruption will wash ashore. I think it will just be really easy to see where it strikes first.
If I was an investor in this market, I would definitely be hedging my portfolio with cloud computing and then also 100% with quantum computing, 100%. I mean, you have to have both to be able to run efficiently, and if any of those hit, then you will be making back your portfolio and your investors and your LPs way more than you could ever imagine. So I think that is an incredible point that is really not talked about. It's like the hidden dragon, the sleeping dragon within this AI race is definitely quantum computing, for sure.
We got one right here, and then it'll come up there.
Hey, I had two questions. So, Peter, you talked about AGI, and I was curious to know how do you formally define intelligence to start talking about AGI? And you also talked about biologically inspired learning, and most of the recent work in that area has been around estimating gradient directions without explicitly doing that. Do you think that's the way we should go ahead?
So your question is definition of AGI? Yeah. Okay. So the quick way to explain it is to have a human level intelligence that can learn, think, and reason the way humans do. So the important thing here is not how much knowledge it has, but whether it can acquire knowledge and think and reason, whether it can conceptualize, basically do induction and learn interactively as it's interacting with the world, as it's thinking about what it's learning and understanding. And we don't have any of that in sort of LLM. They are pre-trained in bulk. So it's not the amount of knowledge or skills, it's the ability to acquire knowledge and skills and to deeply understand that.
I think we've got time for about one more. I think this one here.
Hi, thanks panel. This is Anurag, one of the co-founders at True Foundry, and we are helping companies build a platform to ship Gen AI applications faster. Question is, I think you all mentioned that enterprises were last year in the experimentation phase of trying out and using Gen AI applications. What are some of the white spaces that you all see on the infrastructure management side as enterprises move from this experimentation phase to actually going into production with these LLMs? Love to hear the views.
I think one of the gaps is potentially just around troubleshooting in general, like what it takes to actively get the infrastructure up and running effectively and addressing those sort of issues. I know I've talked to people that work at Google Cloud. They're trying to figure out how do you automatically test all the potential ways that something could be wrong to fix stuff, because everyone's system is going to be different. Everyone has different parameters in place, different actions that have been taken. So I think that's one area that is not as well served right now, where there's just a bunch of time wasted. I think the other aspect is helping more non-technical folks be able to potentially deliver on business applications that they have internally. Trying to figure out how you can describe what you want to accomplish and being able to immediately deploy it with natural language. That area is relatively underserved, and I think that the technical software engineer is going to be less and less common as we go forward. We're going to have more ways to be able to accomplish the same thing without having to necessarily write the code.
With a minute left on the clock, anyone to add to that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you go.
You go for it.
Okay. I was actually just going to kind of make a counterpoint that was a little off the beaten trail, but definitely wanted to make it before the panel ended, was on kind of the content side of having original sources. I don't think a lot of people are actually talking about the fact that a lot of these models have not been trained up to this point to actually ingest data that is current, that is just now happening. So now when we start indexing searches that are up to date in 2024, what we're going to actually see happen is a lot more hallucination, because all these articles have been already written by ChatGPT and or all these other models, and now it's just re-ingesting its own writing, and then it gives you actually horrible, horrible outputs. And I think that is kind of where the originality of the content is really, really important. And like the creator economy, right? Like people that are in the creator economy are making so much money, but it is their original content. And to disperse that, I mean, like you need to get in contact with those people, work with those people. There's a startup that does that here. It's called Creator Match. So definitely try that. But the original side is the content is definitely the most important thing, and dispersing that will be, I mean, the new paradigm moving forward.
Guys, can we have a round of applause for the fantastic panelists?